Thank you for joining us today. My name is Eunice, and I lead the growth team at Funnel. For those of you whom we haven't had the pleasure of meeting yet, Funnel is Southeast Asia's largest private investments platform. We leverage technology and data to curate opportunities in growth and pre-IPO companies for our global network of over 13,000 investors. Follow us on LinkedIn and Facebook at Funnel. We'd love to keep in touch and hopefully meet you in person when it becomes possible. So just some housekeeping before we kick things off. We'll be taking questions via the Q&A feature. So you can find the button at the bottom of your screen and feel free to send us your questions at any point during the event. We'll also be recording this session. So if you have to miss any part of this webinar, not to worry, you'll be able to access a recording after this on our blog. So I guess manufacturing and logistics are two industries that form the pillar of Industry 4.0 and global trade, but we don't often hear about the digital transformations taking place in these sectors because it could be argued that manufacturing and logistics are some of the least understood sectors amongst tech investors. These are industries that chug away behind the scenes to ensure an effective global system of connectivity and consumption. That's until COVID-19 broke out and we started to see incidences like disruptions in global supply chains and logistics, an increased global demand for certain goods, but a reduced manufacturing capacity due to lockdowns and social distancing requirements, which manufacturers were not entirely prepared for. Could the answer to these challenges then be more investments and adoption of automation technologies in these two industries? And how are investors and innovators navigating this process of incorporating automation into their processes with positive impacts to the bottom line? We'll be kicking off the session this morning with a presentation by Champ Sudipang Chai, Managing Partner of Creative Ventures, who'll be providing us with valuable insights into the investments landscape and opportunities in automation within manufacturing and logistics. Following that, we'll dive into a conversation with James Page, CEO of Ribbon, and Jinxian Li, CEO and co-founder of Movas, to discuss the lay of the land from a startup founder's perspective. Champ, I'll let you take it from here.
Thank you, Eunice. Let me share the presentation here. Is everyone seeing presentation? Yep. Okay. Good morning, everyone. This is Champ from Creative. So as Eunice mentioned, I'm a managing partner of Creative Ventures, which is a Silicon Valley-based venture fund based in the Bay Area, Hong Kong, Taiwan, and also Bangkok. So for our fund, we are a systematic deep tech fund that focuses on three global macro trends. Labor automation is one of the things that we invest in addition to climate change and rising healthcare cost themes, where we look for companies with advanced technologies that are defensible in both from a business model and also from a technology modality point of view. We invest into broadly US-based companies, although we do opportunistically invest in other regions, but almost all of our investment are concentrated in North America, whereby after that we help them expand over to Asia. So for today's conversation, the thesis that I was being asked to discuss more about is automation gaining more adoption as a result of COVID-19. And one of the things that I want to start kicking off is broadly, not only in automation, but in many other areas we are also investing in. We're seeing COVID-19 as a driving force to accelerate a lot of the adoption forces that has already been happening. It is actually happening more acutely in certain areas than the other. So out of all the areas that we are looking at, automation is one of the areas where it's gaining much more momentum, and we'll be going in more details of why that is. So from a venture perspective, we're not a short-term investor, right? We cannot afford to be one. So when we look at these investments, it's not enough for us to say, hey, there's COVID and therefore let's invest into X, Y, and Z because there's momentum in the next 6 to 18 months. Because then after that, the fuel may die down and the company may not survive. So what we always look for is the long-term drivers that are fueling the adoption for the automation technology. which we have seen a lot of those drivers centering around the shortage of manual labor, particularly for blue collar workforces. They're shrinking rapidly in many industries, both manufacturing, logistics, as well as food services, agriculture, and even healthcare. So there is a big trend toward adopting automation technology to replace, or not to replace, but rather to fulfill the work that no one is actually doing. But what COVID is doing is it creates the impetus for companies now to adopt technology, not only to fill in the jobs in order to meet the demand, but also to fill in the gap because the corporate profitability has plunged deeply as a result of COVID. So the companies now need to cut the costs, and what is was a better way than to automate and fulfill the jobs that has largely been cut out because of layoff. In addition to the growing concerns around worker safety, if you're bringing worker back, but you cannot guarantee the safety, there's a lot of liability concern. So a lot of the companies are now being forced to look for ways to automate the technology. And this is sort of in a broad eye views what's driving the automation adoption. Let's take a look at this from a bit more of a vertically focused approach in manufacturing logistics, which is what we are talking about today. So a lot of us have probably heard the idea about the supply chain that may be reshoring, and that's mostly because of the lead time to manufacturing the products has increased drastically. There's a lot of difficulty getting the parts and getting things shipped, and subsequently, people have been thinking about, can we move the things back as close to the shore as possible? There are cases where this is possible and it's easier to do so, and in many other cases, it is very difficult. But all in all, in manufacturing, there's a lot of focus on bringing it back, which then leads to figuring out a way to keeping the cost down, which then leads to automating the different processes, which we'll talk about in a minute, but also giving more visibility to the manufacturing process and throughout the supply chain. On the logistic, the drivers is slightly different. We're seeing a drastic increase in the online spending, actually more than 52 billion compared to last year, or 77% year-over-year growth on the online retail spending compared to last year. So this is obviously, as you can all imagine, driven by e-commerce. But because of that, whether it's last mile delivery or it's warehousing and fulfillment center logistics, there needs to be a lot more adoptions of the automation technology in order to fulfill demand of the labor that are being sort of forced to work in a very tight environment, churning out a lot of these shippings. So that's another driver is adopting the automation technology that we're seeing. And we'll go into a bit more details on where the opportunities are that we have been looking into. So for at Creative, what we try to do is try to parse out the opportunity through different lenses. One of the lenses we like to use is to map out different processes to understand what are the tasks that could be automated, to understand the totality of the tasks, if the one person doing the task, or if there's one person is doing multiple tasks. To understand the ability not only to automate the task, but also from economic incentive perspective, is there a way to reduce labor costs? So as we map out in manufacturing processes, it started off with process design, which is thinking about the different manufacturing processes along the specific product line, to purchasing and planning different raw materials, breaking in-house, doing machining, doing part productions, turning, milling, drilling, and then getting things assembled and in a full production capacity, to doing quality assurance and then dispatching it out. There are a lot of opportunities actually that centers around a production phase, assembling being one of the biggest areas that requires automation technology. However, it's actually very difficult to automate assembling. If you can imagine, it's easy to kind of screw the knots and stuff with your hands. But the hands is a very magical tool. It's very difficult to recreate the movement of the hand with robotics arms. So a lot of our attentions have actually turned into things like inspection and welding, where AI and machine learning capabilities, in addition to computer vision, could be used to automate the task. And inspection especially is highly manually labor intensive. Just to give you a bit of a data point, in one of my conversation with Flextronics, which is one of the world's largest contract manufacturer, 10% of Flextronics workforce is actually being used for just purely for inspection. And we see a lot of great opportunity to apply computer vision technology to do full-time, to do real-time inspection of all of the products that are coming out, as opposed to sampling of different batches, both saving on labor costs and increasing the quality standard of the production line. Another area that people might not think a lot about, but are also highly labor intensive, is actually packing. And this is especially true in the consumer packaged good or the FMCG space, where you have a bunch of different SKU. You may have the same product line, but it has to be packed in the different SKU because of different promotions. So maybe you have a 12+1 for this quarter. Maybe in the next quarter, you have some kind of freebies attached to the SKU. And you require a lot of changes in the way that you pack things. So it makes it difficult to automate the task, but it's very, very labor intensive at a co-packing line. So in the productions, quality assurance and dispatching are the three areas that we see a lot of automation opportunity, as opposed to machining, where it's actually highly automated already. You might need a couple of people to kind of operate the machines, but it's not so labor intensive. Let's kind of drill in a little bit in terms of what the solution might look like. And I'll give you guys a little bit of the case study as example of what the technology in question actually exists in the real world. So some of the pain points that we do see that are driving the adoptions, in addition to pure labor shortage that or even the COVID-driven driving forces, is the need to reduce the rejection cost of manufacturing time and money, and as well as actually increasing the supply chain visibility through data collections of their product inspection. Imagine being able to inspect the product, but also instead of knowing when the product arrived, you have the real-time data on on how many of the products is actually rejected and exactly how many have passed this test with certain parameters. And that's the kind of automation technology we're thinking about. It's the ability to put camera at the end of the production line, inspect the product with high degree of accuracy, and be able to spell it out in real time to the customers about the rejection rates and also the acceptance rate. Another pain point that we've discussed about a little bit before is the idea of reshoring, which is actually very expensive. Most of the companies have invested a lot in their supply chain. So bringing things back home is actually not cheap at all. And to automate this, instead of building out tons and tons more robots and machines, one of the ways that we have looked at automating the task is to figure out a way to automate or to make the robots more flexible by reprogramming them in order to, for the robots to adapt to different short-run tasks. For example, packing is a great use case for that, where you might have, the robots might have to do similar things, but a little bit differently. If we have a software that can reprogram the robots, because right now it's very hard to do so, in order to automate multiple short-run tasks, that's another way to automate the problems. So at Creative, one of the things that we do before we invest in is to come up with our own very specific investment criteria that are specific to the kind of market problems and solution that we have been looking into. And for these kind of automation solutions for manufacturing space, we generally look for companies that have very low upfront CapEx investment. Manufacturers actually do not like to put in a lot of CapEx on novel technologies. So having, say, camera at the back of the line that are very cheap are very important to actually gaining adoptions. The other aspects is actually simple installation is also very important. Manufacturing can be very tedious, and you do usually have to integrate the solution specific to that manufacturing line. So simple installation would actually create ability to scale much more quickly and rapidly. As I mentioned, let's just very quickly look at the case study here. So one of the companies we've come across is called Riven, which is a 3D scanner. And imagine being able to put the camera at the back of the manufacturing line to scan completely the complex parts, whether it's medical device parts or car parts that are they have a lot of curvatures, and be able to see if, instead of having to put the parts into jigs and fixture to see if the dimension is correct. What the company is able to do is having very cheap camera that is sub $1,000, put it at the back of all the manufacturing lines and scan the products and be able to test them in 100% quantity, as opposed to kind of sampling parts by parts, and then send this data right back to the customer so they know exactly what the incoming lots would look like, and if they might experience delays. So this is one of the companies that we think fit well with the investment thesis of the inspection automation technology. Another one that we have to look into is called a company called Salty Automation. People would like to think a lot of automation as very hardware driven. The way that we have to look at this is, can we reduce the actual engineering and programming costs of robotics? About 50% of the cost, to 70%, a lot of the time is actually around programming the robots to function and work in a very, very specific scenario or use cases. It's a bit like implementing SAP, where you need implementers and you need people to configure the software to fit exactly with the use case. So what Salty is able to do is to be sort of like a Google Doc version, and able where engineers and non-engineers actually are able to very easily program the robots to do something slightly different without with no necessity to have the ability to code the robots to begin with, so that if you have to automate different short-run tasks, you're able to do so. So that summarized a little bit about our thoughts on the manufacturing automation space. Let's turn on our perspective to the logistics space, where the drivers is a little bit different, because we are seeing, in addition to labor shortage in the warehouse industry, just a massive surge of demand coming from e-commerce space that fueling even more labor shortage in the, whether it's in a warehouse space or micro fulfillment space, as well as last mile delivery. And when we look at this, at logistics space, just to give it a broad stroke of the workflow, people make stuff, you ship things, there's stuff getting shipped across the board, whether it's in freight or in ships, and then it enters the warehouses or fulfillment center, where you unload the pack, then you sort things, you store them, you might resort them into different orders, and you pick them up and then you sort it again. And then you pack them into different nice parcels, put them into different racks and pallets, and then load them into the trucks. You put that into different hubs, where then it's ready to be routed and delivered to different different houses and customer. So the areas that we are very bullish about right now is, there are a lot of unique use cases on load unload. So a lot of them are already being solved, especially with palletized products. But the areas that are very interesting is actually the sorting and the packing. The picking and the storing is sort of similar, two sides of the same coin. But the actually interesting part is actually be able to sort number of different SKUs, especially in e-commerce, where you have a lot of SKUs in different products that you have to neatly sort into different orders and then pack them, which does requires a lot of labor. And from our research, it's about a couple of hundred orders per minute, couple of hundred orders per hours that people in the Amazon fulfillment center that they have to actually pack and and fulfill the order. So it gets pretty laborious to do these, and it's also very unsafe. Amazon is not well known for the worker safety condition, and things have gotten a lot worse because of COVID in maintaining the kind of 6 feet apart social distancing rule, which is kind of very difficult to do so in the fulfillment center. So sorting and packing becomes an area that we do look at a lot, where technology is actually mature enough to sort and to pack things. It's just very difficult to do so, which does breed the defensibility for the technology is able to do this. Then on the delivery part, last mile composed about 50% of the total delivery cost. So that's definitely an area that we are very bullish about, particularly in food delivery. We're still looking at grocery delivery. But if you look at the value for per volume metrics, if you sort of think about how much of the value of the product needs to be shipped or delivered per cubic meters, food deliveries actually has the highest value per volume metrics. And that's a particular area of interest for us right now. In addition, micro-fulfillment is a very interesting area, and I'll talk about this in the next slides here. Micro-fulfillment is interesting, not only because of the need for automation, but because we do see a lot of retail and restaurants that's probably going to fold as a result of COVID because they have a very low cash balance. So for the urban areas, we think that a lot of these spaces will be converted into a micro-fulfillment center that will act as an urban warehouse to distribute, whether it's groceries or different high velocity items for e-commerce purposes, and finding technologies that can retrofit these different retailers and restaurants into a micro-fulfillment center. We think this is a very interesting areas where robots that are highly with high dexterity that can fit very neatly into small areas and have very low human interface that would also complement these existing infrastructures, would have a very high chance of making it into a high adoption. So last slide here, and I'm running out of time. There was a lot to cover there. We have seen one of the company we've looked at is called Ambidextrous, which is actually a fulfillment center grasping robots and work really neatly, where the technology has object recognition, AI technology that can recognize different kind of SKU and then sort the robots into different carts that are ready then to be packed into different orders. So they're solving specifically for sorting technology, where they have both the object recognition technology as well as the gripping technology, both of them combined to be able to sort through these different orders for the fulfillment center, and they're gaining traction pretty rapidly. And caveat, they're not a popular company. So I think it's a very neat, interesting case that I think I'll showcase for the kind of technologies that we've been talking about for automations. So with that, I'll leave my email out here for any of you guys who are interested to talk more about the kind of things that we've been seeing. We are very passionate about investing not only in the space, but also having very deep knowledge on the specific problem and the workflow that we're looking to invest into, especially in the automation space, where I headed a lot of that investment. But yeah, with that, I'll pass the mic back to Eunice, and as we go into some of the panelist discussion.
Thanks very much, Champ. Some really great insights and case studies there. I hope everyone was able to get some good takeaways from the presentation. Let's now move on to our panel discussion. Joining us this morning with Champ, we have James and Jinxian, two serial entrepreneurs from manufacturing and logistics respectively. James Page, CEO of Riven, is joining us all the way from California, so thanks for making the time, James. Riven is a company that provides mass deployable quality control solutions for advanced manufacturing, making inspection of complex geometry on the shop floor and the designer's desk push-button simple with their cost-effective 3D scanning sensors and AI 3D data platform. Prior to Riven, James founded Topo Labs, which was acquired by Autodesk. We're also excited to welcome Jinxian Li, CEO and co-founder of Movaz, which recently completed their $7 million Series A round from prominent strategic investors. Movaz is an all-encompassing relocation service built for the modern world, with a proven track record of making relocation seamless and fuss-free for clients globally. Jinxian is a serial entrepreneur as well, having previously co-founded cybersecurity and fintech startups and currently co-owns Reed's Cafe in Singapore. Gentlemen, thank you for joining me this morning or this evening for James. My first question would be to Champ, actually. Are you actually seeing any increased interest from businesses in automation innovation? If so, in which specific verticals?
Yes, that's a great question. Across multiple areas, I would say. I mean, I've obviously, so the short answer is yes, we're seeing a lot of that driven by a lot of safety concern. And also people wanting to think about long terms, you know, what if the second wave continue to happen? What if this new normal just sort of keeps on kicking out? What if there's a new, COVID SARS? What if there's COVID-20, right? Or COVID-21? That's one of the impetus of driving this concern. The other areas that we've looked into where we're seeing a surge of automation adoption is actually food service, which have a very high hygiene factor. So dishwashing is actually an area where people do outsource in some of the countries, Singapore being one of them, Hong Kong being another. In the Bay Area, there's also a trend that's also starting where people are outsourcing the dishwashing to different centers. And now instead of getting plates to come back in sort of a stack, now we have to kind of wrap things up. So there are more automation works being done in terms of not only cleaning the plates, but also wrapping things. In other areas such as some pizza automation or sandwich automation or fast food automation in general, we're also seeing the needs of people kind of not wanting the ingredients to be touched upon by so many hands, and people slightly placing less value for sort of handmade kind of pizza and sandwiches in fear of COVID. So those are different I'd say that's another area that we're paying a lot of attention to that requires a hygiene factor.
Got it. Great, thanks for that. James, so applying automation in manufacturing is kind of recognized as a necessity now rather than a good to have. And it's pretty complicated due to the number of moving parts within the process of manufacturing. What specific challenges does Ribbon's solution address?
Yes, Ribbon specifically takes on quality control in manufacturing. And this is necessary because although manufacturing is a huge industry, it's $13 trillion, you'd be surprised to learn that how much waste there actually is. There's actually almost 25% waste. So Ribbon helps to reduce the incidence of waste in manufacturing. It helps to correct processes before a lot of product is produced with defects in it. And just to give a specific example, there's a company called Xometry that's a leading provider of distributed machining services. And they are beginning to use Ribbon systems as a unified quality control system that makes it very easy for the 3D data and the quality of the whole parts that are produced to be captured very quickly and shared with their customers to give customers confidence that the parts are going to meet their needs. So that's how we're addressing challenges in manufacturing.
Got it. And I'd imagine that would require some form of skilled labor, but with a shortage of skilled labor, how can the adoption of automation be made more effective?
Sure. Well, the way we see the adoption of technology and our systems is that they really supplement labor, and they can help to level up the workers that you have. So they make the most of the workers that you're able to find and essentially almost help them increase their skill and increase the effectiveness of their output.
Gotcha. Thanks for that. My next question would be for Jinxian. So the issue of scalability in an industry as broad as logistics must be challenging for tech or automation solutions to address as a whole. So from your perspective, what have you seen to be barriers to tech or automation adoption within logistics?
Mm, so I guess like for movers, what we do is that the specific niche that we serve is called personal effects, right? They're like general cargo and it's commodities, and we specifically do personal effects. So what that looks like on the supply chain is that we have it's a very fragmented market because like if I was moving like James from California to Singapore, you know, like it's kind of like furniture moving, and therefore it's very personalized. So you're talking about a very fragmented market, right? A lot of, you know, two guys, one truck, you're a mover, right? And then it goes through the supply chain whereby you have like people doing stuffing in the containers and then warehousing and then customs clearance and the freight and the usual. Okay, so because it's a fragmented market, I think in our earlier days, we created blockchain technology, right? Yeah, which theoretically holds water. Yeah, but when we brought, so we're based in Singapore, right? When we brought blockchain to call it like ABC movers in Singapore. I mean, it was just not the conversation they wanted to have. Like, yeah, so the only thing I think we found out, right, like especially in Southeast Asia, right, that a lot of our small, medium service providers want to hear is like, how do you help me earn more money or how do you save more money, right? Everything to do with blockchain, maybe you can have that conversation a little bit further down the road. Yeah. So adoption is tough. Yeah, and I think specifically in Southeast Asia, especially in Southeast Asia, because what we see is a lot of our service providers, they tend to be family run. So, you know, second generation, third generation, right? So even though like maybe the grandson's operating the company, the grandfather really calls the shots, right? So like, you know, it's that kind of dynamics. And I mean, let alone in moving services, I think our specific niche is this is especially pronounced. So adoption, I guess, it's going to be a little bit slow. We actually had, I guess, we call it constructive friction. We had to like deliberately slow down some of our builds so that, you know, like our service providers can kind of like catch up, right? Yeah, I'll give you an example. Like if we are operating in Bangkok, right, and these guys use APIs, yeah. And if we operate in Penang, our service providers only take fax, right? I mean, who uses fax, right? But anyways, and then in Johor, right, which is like nearer the border, they only want to receive like paper dockets. So I would say that like as a log tech solution provider, operating in a fragmented market has its opportunities, but adoption is going to be a little bit slow. So it's going to take a little bit of time. First and foremost, we have to solve, I think, the commercial problem. Yeah, and it's a very chicken and egg thing, right? If no one comes in to subsidize the adoption, people are not keen to adopt new technology. Yeah, but you know, but it's difficult for us to foster down their throat as well. So we have that kind of a cycle going on.
Sure, yeah. And this brings me back to one of the questions that has been asked by an audience member, which is really around cost and kind of like the cost of labor within Southeast Asia ex Singapore. So the question is, within Southeast Asia ex Singapore, given the low labor costs broadly, how do you guys think about the value that automation brings relative to manual inspection or manual processes? I suppose, you know, within manufacturing and in micro fulfillment, given that, you know, we're comparing the cost of manufacturing automation to the cost of manual processes, and I suppose that can also be the case for the logistics space as well. So maybe James? Ooh,
James,
you're on mute.
Yes, I apologize. You know, I think that in terms of learning more about how automation can some of the opportunities in automation, I think you really have to go deep, and you have to, you know, there's not a simple solution to this. The best thing is actually to go and speak with manufacturers themselves. You can also follow some of the investors who have invested in automation. We've seen a number of different types of investors, including corporate VCs like BMW iVentures, as well as some of the leading VCs like NEA, you know, are very interested in automation and automation technology. And so you can learn a lot from them by following them. But really the answer, you know, if you really want to do your homework, the best thing to do is to go and talk with manufacturers themselves.
Right.
Champ, what's your take?
I'll chime in on this, and just a bit about my background because I sort of skipped that. I spent a number of years in Johnson & Johnson in the manufacturing supply chain, as well as in my family business, which is a massive franchise for Sharp, the Japanese consumer electronics. So when Jinsen was mentioning sort of the generation adoption thing, I'm one of the younger ones who have to kind of course people to adopt things, and we did adopt things with one of the major impetus being that we just couldn't find any more labor, definitely not Thai labor, and then we have to kind of use immigrants and stuff, which brings all sorts of different challenges from communications to legal to X, Y, and Z, and then the turnover is also really high. But in terms of actually adopting it in the context of Southeast Asian markets, this is where there's a difference between direct automations versus indirect automation. So for direct automation, we do, even in the US, we do look for things that have a low CapEx, capital expenditure in installation costs to begin with. Manufacturers are fairly reluctant to pay for a lot of these, especially if they're a bit more novel. So you do want to reduce that friction. And we have seen that people are more willing to pay for subscription-based and kind of robot as a service model, and which is also good for recurring revenue purposes for the companies as well. And I think that's where the market is also moving into. The area that we think is also really great for both the US and Asia for direct automation is around inspection. And in my family business factories, we have trials, different kind of solutions where you put the camera at the back of the line. The camera costs, some sub thousands or even sub hundreds of dollars, and you basically reduce labor based on that. So that you can make it feasible. It is much harder to basically get really expensive robots and make it feasible. That is true. But if you have existing robots, and a lot of them do have existing robots, another way to automate this indirectly is to find software that empower the robots to do more than what it does. And then you can price it based on a value-based perspective. So for software that are scalable, where you don't require a lot of customization and fine-tuning for different use cases, that is definitely adoptable over in the Southeast Asia market. Yep.
Thanks. Any take on that, Jinjian? In relation to micro fulfillment, maybe?
So I guess from our perspective, like the logistics industry, it's unique. I mean, unlike maybe like the banking industry, right? Ultimately, right, there is going to be someone that's physically on the ground that's going to do something, right? It's kind of like Uber, right? We no longer go to the road to flag it, but a guy in a car is going to show up, right? So that part doesn't disappear. So I think for us anyways in our business, like we figured out very quickly was that the role that we play in logistics is more an enablement rather than a replacement, right? It's in the near term, it's going to be very difficult to replace some of the physical elements of the business. So to make it commercially viable, and we are a young startup, right? We are an early stage startup, so we kind of have to solve the problem next month, right? So fairly quickly, is to really look at the commercials, and I can use MoveUs, like our company, as a case study, to make sense of the P&Ls of the people we're working with. Essentially, what we have to do is to figure out the commercial model, right? If we are to kind of launch this kind of tech in the industry and people aren't willing to pay X amount for it, right? Then who would pay for it? Yeah. So an example would be for us, right? We build products that are free for the end users, but kind of the partners that we work with pay for it, right? So why would they pay for it? A good example for us, we realized that when we move, let's say Eunice, right, to where's nice, Shanghai or Estonia is pretty nice, right? So when we move you there, we actually need your passport details, right? We need your visa. We need to know where you stay. We need to know where you're going to stay when you're leaving Singapore, when you're arriving there. The data makes a lot of sense, right? Which means that theoretically, we could subsidize your entire move, right? Because there are a lot of companies, right, that would gladly pay to acquire you as a customer. whenever someone relocates from one point to another, they go into a state of hyperconsumption, right? Plus 1 month, minus 2 months, right? On average, every international relocation, they spend about 30,000 USD. You're talking about flight tickets, moving services, real estate, banking services, insurance, all of that you have to purchase again, right? So it's a state of hyperconsumption. Some stats, people are 10 times more open to new brands, and 85% are most likely to purchase from the very first brand they see, because convenience is king when you're relocating, right? So to kind of reinvent logistics for us, we have to rethink the business model, where the money is coming from and who's paying for what, right? And who needs what. So for our business, right, we actually monetize on the marketing budgets of like companies who really want to get in front of these customers at this golden period of time, right? Right. And to do that, we could subsidize the logistics itself. Yeah, we can basically subsidize the move. I can move you at cost, right? I don't have to earn money from it. Yeah, so I think that's kind of like what Grab kind of did, right? Maybe like Grab Car as customer acquisition, Grab Financials, and maybe Grab Food can make a little bit more sense. Yeah, so really looking at how can you rethink the monetization model and the business model, given that now you have tech, right, and you have data.
Right.
Yeah.
So considering the peripheral services on top of the actual core service of relocation, I suppose.
Yeah. And that specifically goes for logistics. Like for us downstream, there's going to be manpower. Yeah, exactly like Chan said, right? And managing manpower is already a business on its own. Yeah, but that is something that we think we as a small company might not be able to change in the near term. Yeah, without significant volumes, right? But we can rethink the business model to make it make sense.
Got it. Thanks for that. That was really insightful. I have a question for all of you. So what, from a startup founder's perspective and also from an investor's perspective, what can investors do to understand the automation investment opportunity in manufacturing and logistics a little bit better? Maybe we start with Chan.
Yeah, sure. I got on. Yes, that's a great question. I think that a lot of people think that understanding technology investment is about understanding technology, and I think that's partly true. But at least from us, I think that's we spend maybe 80% of our time really thinking about the space that we want to bet on, right? So not just understanding. I mean, in terms of automations, you got robots, you got AI, and you've got computer vision, and that's mostly it. There isn't a whole lot more beyond that. You do not need to be a technologist expert to really see if this is going to work, but you do need to understand whether a certain workflow is automatable. And when I say automatable, it means that if you put a robot in, you can actually substitute a human being out of it. So a janitor is a great example. A janitor is extremely difficult to replace. It's almost replaceable because a janitor does so many different things. You have to have like 200 automation tools to do everything a janitor does. The kind of the jack of all trades, right? So that's the kind of things that we don't like to look at, because the task is not a homogeneous big task. But things that people do repeatedly again and again with really high throughput. In an e-commerce workflow around a pick and pack, sorting, load, unload. These are the things that are automatable, and it's really understanding the workflow and how the technology would fit seamlessly into the operating procedures without a single change. And this is true, without a single change to what they are currently doing would actually have the least frictions and the greatest ability to adapt. And then after that, it's about unit economics and seeing, I'm using human, this is how much it costs. I'm using robots, this is how much it costs. How do we go from there? So that's generally around direct automations. Indirect automations is much trickier. You kind of fighting a bit with a knowledge worker, where sometimes when you do try to automate certain workflow or to help them think about better ways to do things, there's usually a resistance. In the case of Saudi, getting people to kind of adopt tools to learn how to reprogram things, or you can say, hey, now you can reprogram this without using the tools. There's actually a barrier to adoption from the fact that now you kind of say that not only can engineers, basically work with the robots. Anyone can kind of do that, but it's the engineers that are buying the solution. So the engineer kind of feel like the values is being diminished, and you kind of have to work with that a little bit. So that's slightly different. But that's where the nuances of the actual task and the workflow comes in, and understanding what is the path to adoption. That's probably the where we spend 80% of the time on.
Gotcha. Thanks for that. James, what about you? What's your perspective from the other side?
Sure. You know, I'm going to pick up on something I said in the answer to the last question, which is I think understanding the investment opportunities in manufacturing automation, it is a very tricky task. Manufacturing is extremely complex, and the opportunities often arise at the connection points between processes that already exist and are often well tuned. So, you know, in Champ's presentation, he talked about how machining is already very automated. But then you have quality control that isn't very automated, and so the opportunity arises at the handoff between, you know, the manufacturing like machining that is automated and the quality control that's not automated. And really, to do that, to understand it very well, the best way is to go and visit factories and talk to factory owners and see where their pain is. The next best proxy for that is to go and talk with investors who have invested a huge amount of time in understanding it well. I know, you know, Champ falls in that category, for example, but there are others. So it takes quite a bit of time to find those opportunities. But although some people would say that manufacturing is very dry, and Eunice, you mentioned it sort of happens in the background, a lot of people don't pay attention to it, those opportunities are very real, and it is inevitable that Industry 4.0 will progress and create more and more value over time. And so it's just a matter of, with a little bit of digging and some persistence, you can find some amazing opportunities there.
Jinxian, what's your take?
Yeah, they probably concur with like Champ and James. Like, maybe like share a little bit during our fundraising journey. What we realized, my previous startup, for example, was cybersecurity, right? And then like comparing that with like maybe going on a fundraising roadshow for logistics, it takes a little bit longer. Yeah, and I think fundamentally because logistics is nuanced and very similar to manufacturing. The investors that really care are really going to take the time to understand like the specifics of it, right? Where value is created and where actually it's just a nice to have. Like, yeah, so we kind of like went through a lot of that processes together with our investors as well. Yeah, I actually had to take like toy trucks to kind of show this is what happens, right? So that it can help some investors imagine. And yeah, so I guess specific to manufacturing and logistics, yeah, I don't think every investor, you know, we won't fit the mandate of every investor. It was very apparent to us as we were going on our roadshow. Yeah, but the opportunities are absolutely there. I think specifically for logistics, when we were doing our own market research to see if the industry itself, how's it trending, right? And if are there like investment opportunities that we could mimic in America and bring it over to Southeast Asia? Like, I think one of the more popular names is a company called Flexport. Yeah, and they're basically digital freight forwarders. Something interesting we saw about it vis-a-vis the other industries would be they are first and foremost freight forwarders. Yeah, so the entire business is actually anchored on the traditional business, and the digital part of it is more an enabler, right? So it's not always the case because a lot of industries are built product first, right? Whereas like if you look at logistics, a lot of it I think still anchors on existing processes. So very similar to what Champ and James are sharing. And therefore to understand I guess the opportunities, you have to understand the process. And each process is very different. And yeah, like you have to understand the chunks and you have to understand the in-betweens, right? So it's going to take a little bit of time, but yeah, I do think it's because it takes a little bit of time. Yeah, like there are not that many like mass market investors in it. Yeah, and therefore it's blue ocean, I would say.
Got it. Thanks very much for that.
Yeah.
I'm down to my last question, and then we can go into the Q&A. We have a couple of audience questions. But before I close it off, the last question from me is slightly, I guess, contentious. So in today's world, is there still space for automation in light of the massive bouts of unemployment caused by COVID-19? And like, do you think we should still be taking away jobs with automation, or should we revisit, how people can be more gainfully employed?
Yeah, I'll take that one because we do get a lot of that. This is why I begin by saying that the opportunities in the post-pandemic world sort of got concentrated in a very few areas, right? Before I would say, yeah, there's a lot of opportunities, and now, because demand have been much more concentrated, and therefore the shortage of where there was already shortage is even more. The labor, actually, if you look at stats, the Labor Bureau, you see that labor are not very mobile. It's very difficult to kind of move them. Let's say fulfillment center, right? Just because someone in Georgia is, is out of jobs doesn't mean that someone in Minnesota, it doesn't mean that he's going to move to Minnesota to necessarily get that job at that fulfillment center. So there's that. But this is also why we look for the long-term structural problems along the labor markets, where there are clear, we generally like semi-skilled labor, where even if there are people, that doesn't mean that you can throw bodies into them and suddenly they're able to fulfill the role. So in construction industry, for example, which is on the areas that we've looked into, we're looking at surveyor. Construction is interesting because you need like 18 months of apprenticeship, which is like a semi-bachelor degree at that point to really go through, and then you need more experience. There's a bunch of people who are, I think the average age in the construction industry is about 59 years old in terms of the semi-skilled labor. So we look for those areas where even if you have more unemployment, it doesn't mean that there are going to be people, you can't just throw a body in there and expect them to do the job. But there is also a concentration of demands that are forcing the adoptions from this. So increased demands, but not enough supply, or the fact that there is supply, but there is also concern about the social distancing, and there's just no safe way to do it. There's going to be impetus to adopt more technologies in there.
I would just add to that one of the best things that any country can do to help its economy, and in particular in this time of crisis, it's very important that economies do well and that companies do well. And if companies can survive and thrive, then they can bring back some more people. I'm not going to pretend it's completely simple, but by leveraging automation technologies that enable workers to be more effective, it actually increases the net output and it creates value. So those companies can actually be more profitable, the economies can do better, and that does help to level everyone up. So, I don't think it's as simple as the technology or the automation just eliminates the jobs. Picking up on some things that several of us said before, the technology and the automation can actually increase the effectiveness of workers, and that can actually help get all of us through this crisis.
And I'll add to that a little bit. So if you kind of go back to the 2008, right? I mean, there's also a massive unemployment. If you look at a time, you see two things happening. One is the punch of corporate profits, which then, interestingly, there's only one expense category that actually rise tremendously, and that's IT spend. Technology spend actually counter on that, and that's because any kind of projects that is about long-term cost saving or long-term revenue generation basically got killed, right? People are now looking to save money. Automation, interestingly, has historically have the highest adoption when people are making the least money, which is, in a way, yeah, it makes sense. You need to save money now. So in a lot of labor-intensive industry where labor costs make up a great portion of the total cost, which is why we're very bullish on food services on the area. Food service labor cost of the total cost of food service is 30%. So there's a lot of incentive to adopt on that. And the technology that we're looking for isn't necessarily that something that would just replace human, on par, right? Meaning that you put the technology in and you save no money. And what we're thinking is it should save significant amount of money in order for this to be worth it. It's just that now is the best time to do it because you're kind of going in the red if you don't do it.
Yeah, it sort of goes back to Junxian's point about, the commercials have to make eventual sense, and there might have to be some sort of subsidization of that in the initial parts of it, right?
Right.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
like if we can just add, I fully agree with like Chen and James. The problem is that it's a demand problem. It's not a supply problem. So it's not so much a costing problem, right? It's people are just not spending because of COVID. You can't leave your home, right? So I think maybe as a business, the way we can be responsible, right, to the people whom we work with, like it's really to figure out where the future of the business will be. Yeah, and then you're gonna have to create demand again, right? Despite COVID, right? And if you can create demand, then I can hire people. Yeah, so I think fundamentally that's like important. I do think this is like short-term fictional unemployment, right? People will have to figure out where their skills are needed. They're gonna have to pick up some new skills, and then you'll find employability again. Some things that we are seeing, the rise of digital nomads, the gig economy, right? So because of all these like SaaS-based systems becoming highly popular, right? It does create like spikes in demand. For example, Singles Day, right? How do you hire like 1,000 people and fire them the next day, right? Like, so there are systems that support it. Yeah. So, yeah, I guess like we don't really know where this is moving towards per se, but we do think that there's going to be a new normal. And as a business, yeah, I think the way I can be responsible to the people I work with and we employ is to do our best to figure that out and make sure that we as a company, first and foremost, is relevant. Yeah, then I can hire people.
Got it. Thank you very much. That brings me to that's actually my last question, and we don't really have time to cover all the questions from the floor, but I think one that's quite interesting that I would like to have your thoughts on is related to, actually Jason's last point about demand. One reason for automation is to meet the rising demand from the e-commerce space. So will this demand be sustained in the post-COVID world? In the case where demand starts to depress, will we still be able to offset the cost of adopting expensive technologies?
Yes, it's a really good question. Do I think that there will probably be a bit of plunge? Probably. I think it's hard to say. I think it's all speculation at this point. Certainly, retail would come back and try to do everything they can to steal the share back because they have to. So yes, it will probably plunge. But it does come back to the very first thing that I say is what COVID does is accelerating the trend that's already happening. So e-commerce is happening. It's not going to stop. It's going to keep happening. What it does, it forces a lot of the new demographics that never have the ability, or never have the incentive really to use e-commerce. Generally older generations and whatnot to do that. And what it does, it then creates higher density in certain areas that make e-commerce much more feasible from a logistics standpoint. Just like any delivery business, what makes e-commerce works is density of the delivery to a certain areas. So some areas will be because they'll hit a critical density to make this work. Some areas not, but e-commerce has been known to subsidize forever on other revenue, so it will probably continue to happen. It's unlikely that this will not continue, and with all the ads and spendings and everything, yeah, it will probably it will probably pick up very, very quickly on that. I think the estimates is around like about 5 years accelerations from where it would have been otherwise, and that's very significant. Would it drop to the level that it does not garner large-scale investment? Depending on this is why I'd say that for e-commerce specifically, it depends very much on the region. Because in Southeast Asia, we've talked to Shopee, we've talked to Lazada, no one really thinks a whole lot about automation at this point. It's very much demand, sell. On the warehouse and automation, it's a little bit back burner, to be quite honest with you. Where this is much more acute is over in the US, where Amazon has grown to the point where they're getting scrutinized a whole lot because of the worker safety and different conditions, and the fact that they just could not fulfill on time. And they're moving towards 1 day, 1 hour in Asia, we're not quite there yet, and I'm not sure if we're going to get there anytime soon to the level of one day. People are not as gung-ho about like, hey, I need to get this like in a day kind of thing, right? If you do, you walk over to 7-Eleven, you buy the thing. Whereas in the US, the behavior have shifted. It's about 7 years ahead. The behavior have shifted to the point where the expectation is way higher that you do need automation to actually live up to the level of expectation. So that's where the mismatch is at the moment, and where we see the opportunity is.
Got it. Thank you so much. There are actually 3 more questions that I really wish we had time to cover. So what I'm going to do is probably just share that across with you after the webinar. And if you have any time at all, I would love to have your insights on those, which we can then post up on our blog on Funnel. So if you're open to that at all, let me know and we'll share that with the audience. Yeah. Great. So I think that's about all the time we have for today. Thank you, Champ, James, and Jinsin for your time and valuable insights. And thank you everyone for taking the time to be part of today's webinar. As I mentioned earlier, a copy of this recording will be up soon on our blog, and we'll be reaching out to share that with you in the next couple of days. On a closing note, I'd like to encourage you to join us on Funnel to stay updated on our upcoming webinars scheduled over the next couple of weeks. For follow-up questions or access to more information about us or today's guests, please feel free to reach out to us. And for if you're interested in receiving a copy of Champ's presentation deck, please reach out to Creative Ventures at drew@creativeventures.vc. That's DREU@creativeventures.vc. Thanks again, and we hope to see you again at our next virtual event. Gentlemen, thank you very much for your time. Have a good day.
Thank you. Yes.
Thanks,
Thanks, guys.
Bye.